Dr. Grant Wardlaw is a visiting fellow in the National Security College and the Regulatory Institutions Network at the Australian National University. He's held senior executive positions in peak Australian crime intelligence, research and policy organizations, and was recently a senior fellow in the Australian Research Council Centre of Excellence in Policing and Security. Grant generously volunteered to be interviewed about the challenges posed by unknowns in the rapidly changing domain of intelligence. Grant, the intelligence and security environment has changed a lot in the last few decades. Can you say something about what's that meant for the kinds of unknowns that intelligence people have to deal with?
Sure. Well, I think there are two watershed moments really in the last couple of decades. One was the fall of the Soviet Union, and the other was 9/11 attacks in New York. And both of those really changed the game completely for intelligence and moved the system away from the old way of, or the old problems for intelligence, which were really primarily about looking at the amount of missiles, nuclear missiles that the Russians had. There was a more difficult question about the intentions of the Soviet leadership about under what circumstances they used the missiles, but essentially it was a large, slow-moving problem. After the fall of the Soviet Union, that problem obviously largely went away, although there was still components of it there. And what the intelligence community started looking at were the emergence of a lot of transnational threats, so particularly terrorism and especially after 9/11 with the Bush-declared war on terror. But also organised crime, proliferations of weapons of mass destruction and so forth. Very, very different sort of problems for the intelligence community. Ill-defined problems, very fast-moving, very compressed timelines for the intelligence community in terms of reporting to their clients. The nature of the problem was also different in that a lot of the uses to which the information was being put now from intelligence is about trying to prevent a singular event, a terrorist attack, a shipment of weapons of mass destruction material or whatever. So just a completely different environment. So you're moving from an environment where it's been characterised that the Soviet type problem was really a puzzle. It was shrouded in secrecy, but in principle you could actually find out the answers you needed to deal with your problems. In the current transnational crime, terrorism and other thing environment, they're essentially mysteries. They're mysteries in that the answers to at least some of the parts of the problems are inherently unknowable, because even the people that are actually doing the acts don't necessarily know until the last minute when they're going to do it or how they're going to do it.
What about the emergence of the internet? Has that been a game changer?
It certainly has. Mainly because of the vast amounts, obviously, of information that are accessible to everybody. So, in an intelligence sense, that means that a lot of what was really the province of intelligence agencies before is now available to a much wider range of people. So the intelligence community itself actually has a lot of competition now because of the information that's available on the internet. So private providers of data, aggregators of data, all of these sort of things are doing some of the work that the intelligence community used to do in secret. The other side is obviously communication. It's allowed the internet and easy access to it has allowed communication between actors of all sorts, good, bad and indifferent, all around the world. So it means that the planning of nefarious activities of one sort or another is much easier. Because of things like encryption, it can be done relatively securely. So you've got a whole range of different sort of issues where people who would have found it very, very difficult to get together to plan a criminal act, for example, or to organise the logistics, or to monitor what's going on, are now finding that very easy.
Now, you mentioned in terms of the way the game has changed, the emergence of mysteries, or in a sense irreducible unknowns, things we can't know in principle. How has that changed the way in which you provide decision support? Are there ways of making decisions more robust or future-proofed?
I think it's really sort of driven a greater interest in a wider number of analytical techniques for a start. So much more interest in sort of futures analysis of one sort or another, in hypothesis generation and alternative hypothesis testing, all of those sorts of things, which are particularly the latter have been part of intelligence analysis for a long time, but there's been a lot more emphasis now put on innovative analytical techniques. The emergence, as we were talking about, the emergence of the internet, but more broadly the emergence of big data, means that there are a lot of innovative techniques now for trying to sift through, rather than, which is sort of contrary to what I've just been saying, rather than trying to target your collection, you actually go out and get everything you can about a particular area and then try and use smart analytical computer analytical techniques to find new information and linkages within that mass of information. But the key thing is you still have to have your vital questions that you want to answer, and a clear knowledge of how that's going to support a particular decision or sort of decision. Otherwise you run the risk of just being an encyclopedic describer of the world, which is not really going to be very helpful.
As you're aware, there's a line of psychological research that indicates that humans suffer from confirmation bias. We tend to get an idea about what might be so, and we therefore tend to seek out and pay more attention to information that supports that than information that might disconfirm it. And also the other terms for this sort of thing are things like tunnel vision, and of course at the group level you can have things like groupthink.
Yep.
Are there ways of avoiding that in intelligence work?
There are, and that there always have been, but they haven't been probably as paid as much attention as they have been in the aftermath of some intelligence failures, like the weapons of mass destruction report during the Iraqi war, 9/11 itself, and so forth. So the sorts of things that are really being emphasised are competing hypotheses, making sure that there is a much more robust interaction between different analysts within agencies, and testing each other's hypotheses, making it clear what hypotheses you're using and why alternatives haven't been given the same sort of prominence, why you discarded them. The difficulty, I think, for a lot of agencies in the sort of counter-terrorism criminal world, which is very fast moving, where you've got a problem emerges very quickly, a very, very low tolerance, in fact almost a zero tolerance for failure, is that there is actually very little time to really delve into some of those techniques, because the operational tempo is so fast that people don't actually have time to do the things that theoretically they ought to do to be able to be absolutely sure of their assessments.
It's obvious that secrecy is crucial, and it's very clear why that's important. But of course, a potential dilemma is that it involves keeping the public in the dark, and maybe even on some occasions misinforming the public about what's going on. Are there any concerns about the extent to which that can result in abuses of any kind, or misuses of secrecy?
Well, it's certainly been a concern to some sections of the public, and it is a particular concern where, as has happened in a number of countries, that secrecy shroud has been used to actually cover up abuses, and they've come to light one way or another. So there is, again, a lot more emphasis in the contemporary environment on some form of transparency of the intelligence process at a general level, and of the activities, the specific sorts of activities of intelligence agencies. So, I mean, that's, to some people, nothing other than complete openness, which would destroy the raison d'etre of intelligence, would be sufficient. But as long as we've got some of these mechanisms in place and they're robust, I think it's really, countries have got different models, but trying to strike a balance between the need for secrecy and accountability and transparency.
Now, you've emphasized several times the proliferation of cross-agency, multi-source work. To what extent does this create problems in terms of different approaches to gathering information, standards of proof, this sort of thing, approaches to unknowns?
Yep. Look, it's an issue that's really again developed pretty much in the last couple of decades, and it's been driven largely by the much greater use of intelligence by law enforcement agencies of one sort or another, and particularly in the counter-terrorism field, the interaction between the national security intelligence agencies and police intelligence bodies. But the police approach has got to be somewhat different, because in the end, intelligence in law enforcement has to underpin or has to lead to an investigation which results in a prosecution. So the turning intelligence into evidence in law enforcement is quite a different problem from doing something completely behind the scenes in defence.
Yeah, sure. So if you're dealing with something like organized crime, for instance, where the emphasis would be on trying to get things to a point where a prosecution is possible,
Yep.
Then you'd have to pay more attention to things like whether the methods or ways of gathering evidence make them admissible
Yep.
in a court of law. That sort of thing.
I mean, a national intelligence agency doesn't need to worry about its methods and sources being divulged, generally speaking, because it just hands its advice to a decision maker, and the decision maker takes a decision, and that in many cases you wouldn't even know that it was intelligence that had been the basis of the decision. In a law enforcement case, depending on the jurisdiction you're in and what the legal regime governing these things are, a court could actually order that sources and methods be disclosed. How did this information, which was intelligence information, get to start off an investigation? I mean, it's the investigation that actually produces the evidence,
right.
An official criminal investigation. But some judges will say, well, no, I want to be able to see how you generated that in the first place. Was that legally done, for example? And sometimes prosecutions have had to be stopped because the intelligence sources and methods were in danger of being revealed, and the cost of that was judged to be higher than the cost of letting the prosecution fail.
How does the intelligence community, the intelligence colleagues, how do they deal with all of these changes? I mean, this must raise a lot of uncertainties regarding the sort of skill set that people need to have in intelligence. Does it raise issues of needing to be retrained or given new sets of methods, this sort of thing?
It certainly does, and particularly on the back of things like the perceived failures of intelligence around 9/11 and Iraqi weapons of mass destruction and so forth. There has been absolutely massive change in the way that the intelligence community, they are the sort of I guess the public start points for a lot of the change that's taken place in intelligence. But in fact, they were changing anyway because the environment was so different. New organisations have been created with specific intelligence mandates. A lot more cooperation and collaboration between intelligence agencies and between them and the wider community, and then a really, really big push to both develop and refine analytical techniques, and to make sure that the standards around those are well promulgated, and that analysts are given a lot more training and analytical support as they go on. The whole area of thinking about risk and the appetite of the community and of government decision makers for various levels of risk is another thing which has been has been changing rapidly. We've seen this move from a sort of some sort of acceptance of risk, or an understanding that it's inevitable that you can't reduce risk to zero in some problems, to almost the opposite now, where governments, particularly in things like terrorism, will not tolerate any risk at all. And so that's where you get a lot more emphasis on prevention, trying to intervene before something happens, even where that may itself create problems with things like civil liberties and standards of proof and so forth. So I think those sort of issues are going to come to the fore a lot more, particularly with the data collection, where the amounts of data, the types of data that can be collected and the ways in which it can be collected are becoming more and more intrusive. So the civil liberties issues are starting to become much more, I guess, salient for many people.
Okay, well, Grant, this has been really great. Thanks so much for agreeing to do this.
My pleasure. Thanks, Mike.
Okay.